Y'all can see some of the cattle sitting there in the barn. And then I got some cattle out there by the pond, hanging out by the water. And so these animals have been on feed for about a week now. These animals have been on feed for about a week. I'm using a total mixed ration, and there's effectively zero grass out there, okay? The grass, I got a little bit of regrowth. I know you can see a little bit of green coming up, but it's not enough to really give the animals any significant amount of food. And so this morning I used the I've said that there are multiple ways to check the average weight of a herd, right? There are multiple ways to do this. So one of the ways you can do it is every once in a while you'll end up with an animal that is just very, very tame. Like the animal does not run away practically under any circumstance, and the animal's not the animals is very tame. Every once in a while you'll have an animal that's very tame, and if you walk up to that animal and you take the measurement of the circumference of the animal's chest, if you effectively wrap your arms around the animal behind its front legs and then over its back, and you have a circle, if you take there's a measurement for what you can do to get the average weight, or not the average weight, there's a measurement that you can do to check the weight of the animal without putting the animal on a scale. So you can actually wrap a piece of measuring tape around the shoulders of the animal. Like if you go up around the animal and you wrap a piece of measuring tape around its back and around its front legs, and you take that measurement, and then you take a measurement from the front leg to the rear end of the animal. There's a measurement that you can do to get the weight of the animal, the estimate weight of the animal. And if you want to know what that measurement is, you can just go on Google and look it up. How to take the weight of an animal with a measuring tape, something like that. Or another way that I have seen, I actually, and I'm sure I'm not the one who made this up. All right, I'm sure other people have discovered this idea as well. But there is another measurement that I personally use, and I more or less came up with it on my own, but I'm sure that I'm not the only person who like, if I go on the internet and I read about it, I'm sure that other people have discovered this idea as well, okay? I'm sure it's not just me. But there is another way that I take the average weight of my animals, and that is okay, when I have the animals on a total mixed ration. When I have these animals on a total mixed ration, I roughly anticipate that the animal will eat about 3.25% of the animal's body weight, about 3.25% of the animal's body weight in dry matter. And so roughly about 3% of the animal's body weight will be eaten in dry matter, something like that, 3%. And so what I do is I take the amount of feed that I am feeding the animals, and I multiply that by 33. So if right now I'm feeding about 17 buckets a day, and each bucket weighs about 30 pounds. And so I take that 30 pounds and I multiply it by 17 to get the total amount of feed that I'm giving to the animals. Then I multiply that number by 33, because the animal will eat roughly 3% of their body weight. All right, about 3 to 3.25%, something like that. And so I multiply that number by 3, and then I divide that number by the number of animals that I have, which is 31. And when I do that, the average weight of my herd right now is about 543 pounds. All right, they're eating about 17 buckets a day. I got 31 animals back here. I've been collecting this information for about the last week. Right, I've been collecting this information for about the last week. You don't want to collect the information over the course of 12 hours. I've been collecting this information over the last 7 days, right? I effectively have these animals on the feed. I have them on the feed, and and I've had them on just straight feed for the last about 7 days. So I've collected this information, and I've used this calculation, and I have figured out that the average weight of my herd is roughly about 543 pounds. All right. That's what the average weight of all 31 animals is, and that's roughly correct. I would say that is roughly correct. Maybe maybe a little bit heavier than that, maybe a little bit lighter than that, something like that. But 543 pounds is pretty accurate. And so, but that effectively means that over the next 3 weeks, my animals are putting on about 3 pounds a day. My animals put on about 3 pounds a day. I have them on a 65 NEG total mixed ration that's 14% protein. And my animals gain about 3 pounds a day. And how do I know that? Well, and I've sold many sets of animals, right? I have a lot of data that I've collected, et cetera, right? And at the end of the day, if I want to take the average weight of the animal, I can take the average weight of the animal. There are multiple ways to do it, right? And so my animals are putting on about 3 pounds a day, and I've actually had an animal put on, almost 4 pounds a day. You know that one animal that I had that was a bone thin, and he was 600 pounds when I brought him in, 650 pounds when I brought him in. He actually put on about 150 pounds, or it was something like that. He actually put on like 150 pounds in it was like 40 days, 45 days. And so, but that animal was extremely thin. All right, that animal was extremely thin, and he would legitimately just stand at the bunk all day. I mean, if he could eat one more bite, he would just eat one more bite, and he would just stand there at the bunk. That's how hungry he was. And that animal put on almost 4 pounds a day. And so, the rest of the animals, they put on about 3 pounds a day. Okay, they put on about 3 pounds a day. Granted that they have a decent frame and et cetera, et cetera. All right. They put on about 3 pounds a day. That's about where I keep them at, and that's effectively what I go for. Because if you're really looking to push past that 3 pound a day mark, granted that you're not dealing with some extremely large animal, if you're looking to push past that 3 pounds a day mark, you're effectively going to enter a situation where you really need to fiddle fart around with the diet. Like, you need to be adding ruminants into the diet. And and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't really want to do that. You're going to be really teetering back and forth with the possibility of causing severe acidosis in your animals. And to do something like that, you really need to be you need to have the right equipment to do stuff like that. And I don't do stuff like that. All right, I put my animals on grass. When I have them on grass, I check the manure. I check the quality of the grass. And then depending on the quality of the grass and depending on the quality of the manure, depending on how I grade the manure, I will supplement them with a little bit of grain. That puts on about 3 pounds a day. And if I don't have them on grass, I'll put them on a total mixed ration. And the total mixed ration is a 65 NEG, 14% protein. And when I put them on this diet, they put on about 3 pounds a day. All right. And so that's effectively what I do. There are other diets, right? I have spoken about other diets. Like, you can utilize other diets, right? I've talked about corn, distillers grains, and hay. You can use that. Soybeans and corn, that's another good one. Soybean, hay, and corn, that's another good one, right? There are multiple diets that I have personally used that I can say that this was a good diet. And this is something that I could, I would recommend. That's just the stuff that I have used. Okay, there are many other things out there that you can use. You can use wheat mids, you can use corn gluten pellets, you can use whatever, right? Alfalfa. There's all sorts of other feed ingredients out there. And the whole thing about feed ingredients is that if you want to know if your feed is good, effectively all of this stuff has already been studied, and you can just go on the internet and look it up. All right, you can just go on the internet and look it up. Someone's already collected information about it. All right, someone's already collected information about it, and then you can look it up. All right, and you're really, when it comes to a diet, you're really looking for something that will put on more than 2.25 pounds a day. Okay, you don't want to start going under 2.25 pounds a day, because if you're going under 2.25 pounds a day, that you've entered a situation where your results are not good, borderline pathetic, and you could easily improve your results, very easily improve your results. It might just be add a little bit of corn to the diet, add a little bit of distiller grains to the diet, add a mineral pack to the diet. It could be something very, very, very minor, and you will drastically improve your results. All right, if you're going under 2.25 pounds a day, number one, your animal will not grade properly. Your animal will not put on enough weight to effectively hit that commercial standard. It won't. All right, your animal is, you really want to be putting on over 2.25 pounds a day. All right, if you're in a situation where you're putting on like 1.5 pounds a day, 1 pound a day, just understand, and I'm not saying this to make fun of you. All right, I'm not saying this to, kick you while you're down. I'm saying that it is what it is. Your results are pathetically bad. All right, your results are very bad. You can easily improve your situation, very easily. It might be something very minor, like just give them a little bit of distiller grains. And when you do that, you will actually make a positive return on your grain. And in terms of a business sense, that grain will also be tax deductible. All right, you can do something very minor and it will drastically improve your results. It might just be add a little bit of corn to the diet. It might just be, fertilize the grass a little bit better. Right? It might be a combination of both. Fertilize your grass a little bit better and add a little bit of grain to the diet. All right? I mean, we're not talking about, and even if you did that, if you went out and you purchased a tonnage of corn, if you purchased 2,000 pounds of corn from a commodity broker, that would be about $200. All right, that would be about $200. For a tonnage of corn, it's about $190. All right, so it would cost you about $190 to buy about 2,000 pounds of corn. Maybe you will need to feed the animal whatever, 0.1% of their body weight, right? I mean, maybe you need to feed, 10% of the animal's diet in corn, right? 10% of the animal's diet, something like that in corn, 5%, 10%, that's it. If you legitimately, if you have a 500-pound animal, and that animal's on grass, and that animal is eating, that animal is only putting on about 1.5 pounds a day, you might legitimately be able to put on an extra 0.5 pound a day by just giving the animal 3 pounds of corn. All right, if you just give the animal 3 pounds of corn, you'll put on an extra 0.5 pound a day. All right, and then if your grass is not growing in very well, if your grass is not, because your grass, if your grass is somewhat growing in correctly, even then your animal should be putting on more than 2 pounds a day. All right, and if you decide that you're going to fertilize your grass, and let's say you have a 10-acre field, right, and you're going to fertilize your grass, and you're going to put whatever, you're going to put 50 or 70 units of fertilizer. You've decided that you're going to put 70 units of fertilizer or whatever, right? You've diagnosed your field. The whole thing about diagnosing mineral deficiencies is that at least try again, okay? Because the thing about diagnosing mineral deficiencies is that in terms of a practical skill, it is one of the most important things that you will have to learn how to do to grow crops. All right, if you cannot diagnose a mineral deficiency, how are you going to decide what fertilizer to use? All right, if you cannot diagnose a mineral deficiency, how are you, are you going to send in your soil for a soil test every 3 weeks? Are you going to send in your soil test for a soil test every 2 weeks? Is that what you're going to do? I mean, in terms of growing a crop, in terms of growing grass, like one of the most practical things that you could ever learn to do is diagnose a mineral deficiency, all right? You have to learn how to diagnose a mineral deficiency. If you don't know how to do it, you'll effectively be wandering around in the dark your entire life. All right, you won't even know what fertilizer to put on your grass ever. All right, and the fertilizer that you do put on your grass will produce suboptimal results. All right, I show you what's possible when I do it. All right, when I put fertilizer on my grass, you've seen, I've shown you how I've shown how my grass grows, right? And I've shown what it costs me. Like me, when I fertilize my field, it costs me like $350, and maybe I do it 7 times out of the year. And when I do that, I legitimately grow enough grass to feed 3 or 4 500-pound animals 24/7, 90% of their diet. All right, you have to learn how to, or don't, if you don't want to learn how to do anything, all right, if you, then wander around in the dark until the day you die. Have fun on your magical journey, okay? Because it's not like, oh my God, well, what if I just didn't learn how to do it, and then it just worked out for me, right? It's not going to work out for you. All right, if you don't know how to diagnose a mineral deficiency on your field, if you don't understand how to do that, if you're not even attempting to try and learn how to do that, then you're not going to make it. All right, I mean, how are you going to determine what fertilizer to put on your field? How are you going to determine? I mean, if you have an objective way to do it other than that, then that's good. Then do it that way. But if you don't understand that if you don't understand that, like how to use fertilizer properly, you're not going to be able to grow anything. All right, you won't be able to grow anything. All right, if you don't use fertilizer, your crops are not going to grow. All right, and if you use too much fertilizer, you can actually damage your environment. It's a balancing act. When you use fertilizer properly, you can actually improve the quality of your environment. All right, if you don't fertilize the grass, and here's the thing, and I've always said that, the big important thing is that at least you're going the right way. That's the big thing, right? In terms of going the wrong way, if you're sitting there going, oh my God, like if you're legitimately, like if you're sitting there going, oh my God, well, I'm just gonna let it rain. And when it rains, my grass will grow. You're legitimately going the wrong way. Completely going the wrong way. Oh my God, if it just rains, then my grass will grow. If I just wait, my grass will grow. If you're legitimately sitting there doing that, you are going completely 180 degrees in the wrong direction. How is that even possible? Right? When I legitimately sit here and show you exactly how to do it. I even show you how fertilizer works. All right, even if you do get some minuscule amount of grass, the biomass, the feed values of the grass will be very low. The feed values of the grass will be very low. Your animals will not put weight on it properly. Right? I mean, congratulations. All right, have fun putting on your 1 pound a day, your 1.5 pounds a day. If you even attempted to go in the right direction and did it even 10% correctly, you could drastically improve your results. And it would cost you what? Like a couple $100, and you could double your output, increase your output by 30%. All right, for the love of God, do not go in the wrong direction, all right? Like, when I see, like, how did so many people end up going in the wrong direction? I don't understand. All right, you have to start at least going the right way. You do need to fertilize your field. If you don't fertilize your field, your crops will not grow properly, all right? All right, some fields you might need to put phosphorus on some fields. You might need to put sulfur on some fields. You may need to put a sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen blend, right? In that priority, right? Once you have solved your sulfur deficiency, now you have a phosphorus deficiency. Once you have solved your phosphorus deficiency, now you have a potassium deficiency, or now you have a nitrogen deficiency. And after you solve the nitrogen deficiency, now you have a potassium deficiency. Right, and so you've taken a look at your situation, and now you're going to put a 1777 on your field and then plow it into the field, and then over the next month and a half you're going to put urea across your field, right? Oh, something like that. And something like that, like if I put 1777 across my entire field, and I was going to put 50 units of NPK on my field, which would also be 21 units of sulfur. If I was gonna do that, it would cost me what would that? It would cost me like $900. All right, it would cost me $900, and that would effectively be enough. That would be enough phosphorus to last my entire field for about 6 months. That would be enough phosphorus and potassium to last my field for the next 6 months. Let's say I put 70 units of phosphorus on my field. That would cost me like whatever, like $1,000. That would cost me like $1,200. Maybe 12, and that would be enough phosphorus to last my field the entire year. If I just went over that field and put urea on the field as the grass was growing, because nitrogen is a negatively charged fertilizer, is a negatively charged molecule, right? Nitrogen fertilizer is a negatively charged molecule. There is ammonium and then there is nitrate, and they are both negatively charged. Your field, your soil is also negatively charged. If it rains, the rain will create a solution with the negatively charged fertilizer. That fertilizer will be repelled from the soil because they both have negative charges, and it will go through your field. All right, if you don't use fertilizer, your crops are not going to grow. They're not going to grow well enough for you to get any sort of a good result. All right, take a look at the results for what they are. My animals, just to put and I'm not saying this to brag about it. I am just telling you this to give you a reference point of what am I talking about. When I grow grass, I legitimately grow enough grass to feed 300 to 500-pound animals per acre. And these animals put on more than 3 pounds a day. All right, they put on more than 3 pounds a day. And it costs me about $350. 7 to 8 months out of the year, that's it. That's the reference point. If you're grazing your field and your animals are putting on less than, if your animals are putting on less than 2 pounds a day, and I'm not saying this to make fun of you, or I'm not saying this to make you feel bad about yourself. I'm just saying it is what it is. If anything, I'm saying this so that maybe you can do better for yourself. If your animals are putting on less than 2 pounds a day, and you have a growing animal, you have like a yearling steer, like a 500-pound animal. If you're putting on less than 2 pounds a day, your results are actually kind of pathetically bad. But the good thing is that you could do something very minor, improve your output just a little bit, and it will drastically improve your results. It might just be put a little bit of fertilizer on your field. It might just be put a little bit of fertilizer on your field and feed your animals a little bit of a grain supplement. And you will legitimately increase your output by like 50%, 30%. It could be something very minor like that. Give them a mineral pack and give them some grain and fertilize your grass a little bit. And if you do that, just that, it will legitimately, it may legitimately improve your results by like 30%. All right, and when it comes to grazing grass, depending on the growth stage of the grass and et cetera, right? Depending on, and I've always said the whole thing about grass is that as it grows, the feed values of the grass will change, right? If you have a grass that is just now starting to grow and it's 3 inches from the ground, the feed values of that grass will be absolutely astronomical, all right? And, you should not have your animals just eating that, right? You could, I would, at that point, I would recommend either, giving your animals some kind of a heavy roughage material, a large amount of roughage material, or feed them a majority of their diet in a total mixed ration. In terms of a generalized idea, granted that you have fertilized your grass correctly, granted that you are, accumulating biomass to somewhat of a relatively good degree, when is the proper, how do you, determine when should you start grazing your grass? When your grass has started to develop a flag leaf. When it started to develop a flag leaf, not when the flag leaf is already just, just already there. When it started to develop a flag leaf. When your grass has started to develop a flag leaf, that is usually about the optimal time to start grazing your grass. The biomass accumulation will be good, and the feed values of the grass will be good as well for most grasses. All right. If your grass has already gone to seed, if your grass has started to form grain heads, if your grass has started to form seeds, then the feed values of the grass are going to be very low. And if you have a perennial grass, right? If you have a perennial grass, like you have prairie grass, a lot of prairie grasses are, granted that you're not talking about like Johnson grass. I'm not going to say a lot of them. There are grasses that are perennial, and then there are grasses that are annuals. And if you have a perennial grass, the feed values of the grass will typically be lower than an annual grass. So when your animals are eating the grass, how can you tell if the animal is having the proper diet? You take a look at the manure, all right? That's how you do it. All right, it's not complicated, okay? It's not complicated, it's not complicated. And if you're putting on less than 2 pounds a day, if you're putting on, 2 pounds, less than 2 pounds a day, well, I mean, I'm gonna say if you're putting on less than 1.5 pounds a day, okay? Because if you're starting to put on about 2 pounds a day, you're just about there, all right? At about 2.25 pounds a day, you're effectively hitting about the about 2.25 to 2.5 pounds a day. You're really starting to enter a situation where you're pretty much doing okay. But under 1.5 pounds a day is, if you're getting close to that 1.5 pounds a day mark, under 1.5 pounds a day, that's very not good, okay? That's very not good. You could do something very, very, very minor, and it will drastically improve your results. But 2 pounds a day, even 2 pounds a day, 2 pounds a day is not exactly a phenomenal, okay? It's not exactly phenomenal. And just to put things in perspective, if you are putting on 2 pounds a day, but instead of 2 pounds a day, you put on 3 pounds a day, you are actually doing 50% better. All right, you're doing 50% better. All right, and I've shown you, in terms of the major diets that I use to put on 3 pounds a day. I've shown you how I do it. Right, when I have the animals on grass, I feed them about 90% of their diet on grass because it is forage material, and you don't want to be switching back and forth between forage and grain all the time. I feed them about 10% of their diet in a grain supplement when I have them on a majority of grass, right? That puts on about 3 pounds a day. Another diet is I use a total mixed ration that is 65 NEG. 65 NEG, and it's 14% protein. That puts on about 3 pounds a day. In terms of about 2.5 pounds a day, 2.5 to 3 pounds a day, soybeans and corn. Soybean and corn, soybean hay and corn, they grow a lot of soybeans up towards Arkansas in my area. A lot of soybeans. And so sometimes, if they get a real good crop out there, I can get soybean hay for real cheap. Soybean hay and corn will put on about 2.5 to 3 pounds a day. So those are distiller grains, corn and hay, a combination of those three will put on about 2.5 to 3 pounds a day. So those are some diets that I personally use to put on, over 2.5 pounds a day. Those are the diets that I use, all right, for my animals. There are many other diets that you can use, but those are some of the ones that I use, okay? And if you're putting on less than if your animals are putting on less than 1.5 pounds a day, that's borderline pathetic. All right, and I'm not saying that to make fun of you. I'm not saying that to give you a hard time. I'm just saying, you could do something very, very, very minor, and it will drastically improve your results, all right? If your animals are putting on 2 pounds a day, you're kind of entering a situation where you're doing pretty okay. You're doing okay, but I mean, you could still improve your situation pretty easily, all right? I mean, it might, you could improve your situation pretty easily. And, at about 2.5 pounds a day, that's where you kind of hit the sweet spot. All right, you really want to be putting on over 2.5 pounds a day. And when you start putting on over 2.5 pounds a day, you really entered that situation where your animals are going to look real good. All right, your animals are going to look like that, when you take them to the sale barn, they're going to be, they're going to like them. All right, the buyers are going to like them. Oh, this is a real good looking animal. All right, you really want to put on more than 2.5 pounds a day. If you want top dollar for your animals, you're gonna have, your animals are gonna have to look, your animals are gonna have to look good. Your animals are gonna have to look well cared for. All right, and that's, the commercial market is where you really make your money. All right, from what I have seen. And in terms of just, in terms of finances, and I was actually taking a look, but over the next 6 months, because here's the thing, I've actually, I've actually entered a situation where I have become a rich person. I have legitimately become a rich person, maybe over, but I have legitimately become a rich person, okay? Like, I genuinely don't worry about money at all. I don't worry about money at all. It doesn't matter to me. I can buy anything. It doesn't matter, all right? But here's the thing, and I'm not looking to get too far ahead of myself, but, but I guess in terms of just, when I take a look at it, I actually think that over the next 3 years of my life, by the time I'm about but over the next 2 or 3 years of my life, over the next 2 to 3 years of my life, I legitimately believe that I will become wealthy. Like, I will legitimately become wealthy. When I take a look at it, because here's the thing. It's like, okay, so as of right now, I make about $350,000-$500,000 a year. And I would consider that, that's how much money I bring home, okay? I bring home about 350-500 grand. And that effectively puts me in a situation where I'm rich, right? I'm legitimately rich. I don't, with about $450,000 a year or whatever it is, I can effectively buy anything. All right, I can effectively buy anything. I would consider myself legitimately rich. If I even felt like it, I could just walk off into the sunset, right? I would consider it rich. But, but my income is actually still growing. My income is actually growing, and if anything, it's actually picking up pace. My income is actually increasing substantially more as I go. I may legitimately even double my income by the end of the year. I may genuinely double my income by the end of the year, and I may even double it again by the end of next year, maybe even more. And I would actually anticipate that over the next 2 to 3 years, I genuinely become wealthy. Like, I'm not going to be rich for very long. I'm actually going to enter a situation where I genuinely become wealthy. And and the whole thing about this is, like, when I show my financials and I show you how I run my financials and I show you how I utilize capital and things like that, the reason that I do that is to show you how I do it. And I'm effectively just giving you a reference point, because, it's like, at the end of the day, when it comes to personal finances, I am effectively one of the best on the planet at it. Legitimately one of the best. All right, I show you how I utilize capital, and the reason that I do that is because I want to make it public knowledge. I legitimately make more money than effectively anybody on the entire planet, and here is exactly how I do it. I take my capital, I purchase a tax-deductible asset that I can knowledgeably appreciate. That asset, once it is stabilized, I leverage against it. When I do that, I leverage for about 70% of the value. That puts me in a situation, because you have to understand that right now I invest about 90% of my money. So that puts me in a situation where I have actually invested about 150% of my capital. I actually invest more than 100% of the money that I make. I invest about 150% of the money that I make. All right. And so in this situation, but that's effectively how I do it. All right. That's how I do it. I invest about 150% of my capital. And the reason that I do that is for tax benefits, and I can actually appreciate the value of my asset. All right, I show you exactly how I do it. And, but at the end of the day, you have to understand that there are steps to this, right? There are steps to this. And in terms of like knowledgeably appreciating capital, that's what I would consider the very, very, very highest level of investing. Once you can knowledgeably appreciate money, that's the highest level. All right, a very, 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 very good way to get started at this is to enter it at to develop an understanding of investing, right? What is investing? You are taking your capital, and you are purchasing something that is equally as valuable as the capital. And the reason that you do that is because you are trading your money for the asset. You're not buying anything. You are trading your money for the asset. The asset is just as valuable as the amount of money that you put into it. And the reason you do that is because now you have an asset that is as valuable as the money, and the asset is producing you a return. If you legitimately want your money back, you can liquidate your asset. right? It's the same exact thing, but that asset will produce you a positive return. All right, and I talk about the bigger, broader economy and et cetera, et cetera. You know, the deficit spending is probably going to increase. We will probably continue to see deficit spending. When we have deficit spending, the expansion of the money supply is the big byproduct of this, right? I talk about the expansion of the money supply. When you increase the amount of money that exists, but you don't increase the amount of assets that exist proportionately, then you end up in a situation where the amount of money in the economy is causing the prices of everything to just go up. And I use Coca-Cola as an example, right? Chances are that exact same, if you are drinking a can of Diet Coke today and you paid $1 for it, there is a very realistic possibility that in 10 years, that $1 can of Diet Coke will be $1.50, and it will be the exact same Diet Coke. That's the example that I use, right? That's 50% more expensive, right? That's just a very, whatever, that's a very, just a, whatever, right? And, I use a T-bone steak as an example. If you are paying $10 for a T-bone steak today, when you go to the grocery store, if you're paying $10 for that steak, there's a very realistic possibility that you may end up paying $15 for that exact same steak in 10 years. That's effectively the idea of inflation. Why does that happen? Because an expansion of the money supply. Deficit spending will probably continue, all right? If you are not holding on to assets, right, and I've spoken about this, if you do not hold on to assets that produce positive returns, you will have to work for every dollar that you have. All right, you will have to work for every dollar that you have. The moment you stop working, you will have no money. Right, and your life is not going to turn into a magical journey. If you legitimately think that the prices of things are going to fall drastically, you're actually probably more or less going the complete wrong direction. If anything, it's going to go the other way. Right, if there is legitimately a major problem in the U.S. economy, there may be trillions and trillions of dollars of deficit spending to stop the collapse. And then you're going to see 50% inflation over, you're going to see 30% inflation over the next 5 years. All right, if you're not holding on to assets, and I've spoken about this, the whole thing, but it's kind of a difficult spot, because when you think about it for what it is, when you take a look at the economy for what it is, the economy today, the economy that we currently exist in has produced massive benefits for humankind. Massive benefits, right? Like, even if you're if you're poor in America, chances are your quality of life is much better. Like, if you're poor in America, your quality of life is significantly better than being poor in a third world country, right? In terms of an objective lens, right? Your life is a lot better in America than it is anywhere else. Effectively, right? That is the situation that we are in, right? And I understand, the economy that has been built today has effectively produced massive benefits for effectively effectively more or less the entire population. All right, and we're kind of in a difficult spot, right? We are in a difficult spot, but do I think it's the end of the world? No, I don't. All right, I don't think it's the end of the world. And if it is the end of the world, then what does it matter? Because it's not like, legitimately 98% of everybody's going to die. All right? It's not like, oh my God, well, I'm just going to go run around and, run around in the woods. No, everybody's going to die. All right? It's not the end of the world. I've always said don't hope for the end of the world, because if it legitimately is the end of the world, everybody's going to die. All right? Legitimately, everybody will die. 98% of people will die. All right? Do I think it's the end of the world? No, I don't. All right? I don't think it's the end of the world. We are in a difficult spot. All right, and and in terms of a solution, in terms of a financial solution, from what I have seen with my life, is to learn how to invest. If you learn how to invest, It will put you in a much better situation. All right, you don't need a massive amount of money to effectively have to be able to buy anything on the entire planet. All right, effectively, if you start bringing home about $15,000 a month, you can buy anything. I don't think it's the end of the world. I understand that we got a lot of things going on with the economy. Iran and Israel are blasting each other. Ukraine and Russia are blasting each other. China is kind of sitting there, fiddly diddling around with Taiwan. And I actually spoke about this a long time ago. I think that the big problem with all these wars is everybody just starts dogpiling. Oh, well, here's my chance, right? That's the big problem. All right, and because it's like, if it comes down to it, America cannot fund a war in Ukraine against Russia. America cannot send financial aid to Ukraine, send financial aid to Israel, and send financial aid to Taiwan. It cannot do that. It would hyperinflate our economy. Or it would be disastrous for the U.S. economy. All right, so the only thing, if something like that legitimately starts to happen, is that America would have to send troops to Eurasia. We would have to send troops to the Eurasian continent and start fighting the war one front at a time. And that effectively turns into World War III, right? Because it's like, how are you gonna, send troops into the Eurasian continent and then stop a war, in India India and Iraq are also blasting each other, from what I understand. But how are you gonna stop a war from Ukraine and Russia, Taiwan and China, and Israel and Iran at the same time? You can't. You'll have to fight one war at a time, right? And we can't fund all three. That would destroy our economy. And so I hope something like that doesn't happen, because if something like that happens, I mean, and if you like, because me, I don't know what World War II looked like. I don't. I'm too young, right? But you can read about it in books. Tens of millions of dead people. Right? Tens of millions of dead people legitimately everywhere. People getting gassed in chambers. I mean, the most horrible things that you could ever imagine, right? Concentration camps. Right? I mean, the most horrible thing you could ever, young men running off of boats getting blasted by machine guns. I mean, like, the most horrible thing you could ever imagine, right? Who would want that? Or, I mean, are you dumb? Like, who would want that? But I mean, I hope that it doesn't turn into that, okay? But right now, it's kind of turning into a it's kind of turning into a tough situation. And the whole thing is that the big problem is the dog pile, right? It's the dog pile. Everybody just decides to just kind of go for it, right? Ukraine and Russia attacking each other. Iran and Israel attacking each other. Next thing you know, you got China and Taiwan attacking each other, and America can't fund all three of these wars. It would destroy our economy. So now we have decided to send troops to Eurasia, and now we're having to fight, wars, one front at a time, and it's this horrible situation, right? Millions of people are dying all over the place. I hope that doesn't happen. Could it happen? It definitely could. All right, but I don't hope that it happens. But it could. All right, and that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all